Hi, and welcome everybody. I'm Maureen Scully, also known as Agent Scully. Turns out Agent Mulder is out chasing a conspiracy theory, but I'm a professor of management. I'm at UMass Boston, and I think about the corporate world. I teach and do research on today's guiding question. How can people inside corporations make a difference regarding urgent, and they are urgent, social and environmental issues? And it may not be people with the title of VP of Sustainability, but really anybody working from where they sit. In fact, I hope that's some of you who've joined us today who are already making important changes, or maybe you're busy dreaming up what it is that you really want to do. Please do note that today's webinar is being recorded and the recording will be shared publicly. Today's leaders realize that social and environmental sustainability is not a desirable differentiator. It's really a business imperative. So alongside what's going on with research institutes, scientists, government agencies, policy think tanks, great, we really need corporations addressing today's challenges. And that doesn't mean a faceless entity called the corporation. It means the people inside, the people creatively pushing for change. And it may start small. For example, one of my MBA students got his company to rethink which sales conventions do we really need to be flying to in person. They reduced it to a few, with the result that they decreased their carbon footprint, got jazzed and focused about the ones they did go to, which was a good business result, and spillover effect, employees liked the better work and life balance. Planet, profits, people. Small wins like these are little sparks, but they can get other people excited, they can open a path to scaling up, and they give us stories to tell. And so with that, I'm going to pivot to our speakers today who will share their stories. Now, you'll often hear us using this term, corporate social intrapreneur. Some of you may have heard that. Let me just give it some context. More often, you've probably heard the term social entrepreneur, people who go and create new hybrid social/business entities. We call them innovators, and yes, that's great. But let's remember they're innovators also inside the corporation, hence the intrapreneur, whether they're in new ventures or decades-old companies. And they're social entrepreneurs. They seize opportunities to align business and social goals. And particularly, they can do so using what they know deeply about their corporate setting as insiders. They know what levers to pull, what allies to find. So our panelists today know a lot about corporate social intrapreneurs, having played that role, coached others, been an ally, championed innovators. So each panelist will say a little bit more about their role when they speak, but let me briefly introduce Nancy, Andrew, and Matt. I'm really excited to have them there today. I've already had the benefit of hearing some of their stories. You're going to walk away from this inspired because the problems are big, but the things we can do about them are big too. So I'll start with Nancy McGaw, who has been working with and supporting corporate social intrapreneurs, AKA the first movers who get the ball rolling, for over 15 years. She founded the Aspen Institute's First Movers Fellowship back in 2009, herself a first mover, where corporate social intrapreneurs can come together to meet, to strategize, to encourage each other, now 300 strong as an alumni community. Nancy is the author of a new book, Making Work Matter: How to Create Positive Change in Your Company and Meaning in Your Career. So if you're a longtime change agent, or if you're an aspiring change agent, you really need to read the stories and advice in this book. In fact, I'm assigning it in my MBA leadership class this coming term. Next, please meet Andrew Ohm, who was selected for the First Movers Fellowship program in 2020. Andrew has worked in design roles at Starbucks for 11 years. I hope you all have a cup of Starbucks beside you on your desk. He's currently director for the Digital Retail Experience Innovation Accelerator. I love just that term, Innovation Accelerator. He's a design expert and a certified life coach. He's also served as a peer coach for other First Movers Fellows. Next, please meet Matt Breitfelder. He's currently the global head of human capital at Apollo. Matt has been involved with the First Movers program since actually before it existed. In 2007, he joined a charrette with other leadership development experts to imagine, what would we do? blank piece of paper. What would a fellowship program for corporate social intrapreneurs look like? Matt served for years on the First Movers design team, and he's remained an unflagging champion for this work. So what we're going to do next is we'll have 3 rounds of questions where each of the 3 panelists will participate. They're going to talk about what they do. You'll hear more about their roles, what they see ahead, and then what advice they'd offer. Your role is to be taking notes, to be ready to ask a question. As you'll hear, asking a question, and I always say in my class, there's no dumb questions. There's the question you're thinking of that everyone else wants to ask too. So please be ready to play your part and ask some questions. So to open, Nancy, why did you start the First Movers Fellowship? What was on your mind? Why write the book? What are a few lessons you've learned along the way about how corporate entrepreneurs, see, I slip into that, corporate social intrapreneurs make progress in their companies? You have a long view to share with us.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Maureen. So thrilled you're here. And Matt and Andrew, I'm excited about this conversation. You all are experts in this world of corporate change making. So eager to hear from you. But I will start by saying I have been at the Aspen Business and Society program for a long time, about 23 years, and well over 15 years ago, in around 2000, we started having conversations with leadership development experts, and we were asking a couple of fundamental questions. What kind of leaders do we really need in business if we want them to deliver a result that's good for the business and good for society and the planet? And it was out of those conversations that the First Movers Fellowship program emerged, because a couple things we learned through those conversations. One is that there really weren't a lot of leadership development programs available at the time that built this kind of capacity amongst leaders in companies. And we also realized that it really wasn't just about responsible business practice. It was about innovation. And what we needed more of were social innovators within companies, the kinds of entrepreneurs who imagine new products and services and new management practices, new ways of making decisions in companies that deliver value for both business and society. So we began to think that if we could find these entrepreneurs in business, and we could learn a lot from working with them, and if we had a fellowship program, we could help them build the courage and capacity to be even more effective entrepreneurs. That was our vision. And I think it's really important to underscore something that you said, Maureen. We were looking for people, not just the innovators who had the mandate to drive this kind of change in business, the ones in sustainability roles and social impact roles. We wanted people from across the companies, from human resources, from design, looking at you, Andrew, from marketing and finance. And we have found them over the years. So we launched the program in 2009, and I am thrilled to say that we just welcomed our 16th class of fellows to the First Movers program. And I wrote the book many years later. After working with over 300 of these entrepreneurs. And I wrote it for a couple reasons. One, I really wanted to tell their stories because they're fabulous stories and inspiring stories, I believe. And also because I wanted to provide a guide for people who wanted to work this way in companies. I wanted it to be the kind of guide that I wish I'd had when I was in banking for many years ago. So the book contains lots of inspiring stories, and I hope really usable tools for people who want to step up to this entrepreneurial challenge. And just before I close, I thought I'd mention a couple things that I've learned, maybe 3 of the many lessons I've learned about what successful corporate social entrepreneurs do. And the first thing I'll say is that they imagine possibilities. They imagine possibilities that could deliver value for their company and for society, and things that really matter to them. So the first story in the book is about Kevin Thompson. who at IBM many years ago saw a way to create a link between leadership development and corporate responsibility, a term very much in use back in the day. And relying on his expertise in marketing and in strategy, and also his experience in the Peace Corps, he helped to implement a now famous IBM Corporate Service Corps, which provided opportunities for talented employees to work on community projects across the world. Another thing I've learned is that effective corporate social intrapreneurs really understand the power of storytelling, and they hone their storytelling skills. Another story I tell in the book is about Suzanne Ackerman. Suzanne was at Pick and Pay. Her father was actually the founder of Pick and Pay, which is a large supermarket in South Africa. Suzanne was determined to alter the supply chain for this large supermarket chain. She wanted to bring more Black and small business owners into that supply chain. And she wanted to develop programs that would help them become reliable suppliers to Pick and Pay. But instead of telling about the reason to do it and the numbers of people who would be helped, she would tell stories about people who had benefited from these programs, like Anna Fusa, who became one of the most successful Black female pig farmers throughout Africa as a result of her work with Pick and Pay. And finally, I'll just say that the other thing I have learned is that the most effective corporate social entrepreneurs lead with a deep sense of curiosity. They ask questions and lean into inquiry rather than advocacy. So they arrive in meetings with thoughtful questions, I would say, rather than just a list of bullet points. Well, I'll stop there, Maureen, and you can turn to others.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I really encourage people to read the stories because they spark for us, oh, I can do that. And we'll remember forever your story of a successful Black South African pig farmer and how, a store can make a difference through changing their supply chain. So thank you so much for that. And Nancy urges, ask those questions humbly and often. So I hope our participants today are gathering questions. I'm going to turn with my next question to Andrew. So tell us more about the work that you're doing now, and specifically, how do you see yourself as a corporate social entrepreneur within Starbucks? And because I know this is a core value for you, how do you encourage others to step into that space as well?
Thanks, Maureen. I'm really excited to be here. First Movers was really a life-changing experience for me, so I'm glad to be part of this panel. So thank you again for the invitation. In terms of what I'm doing right now at Starbucks, I've been leading a team called Discover and Design for the past 5 years. So my team plays a role within our digital customer experience around trying to understand what are the early stage opportunities that we should be focused on. How do we quickly learn about those? How do we quickly bring those to market? So my team serves the in-house human-centered design consulting team within Starbucks. And that is, I would say, the lion's share of the work that my team does. On the side, though, we have, I think, these superpowers within our team around creative problem solving, around imagination, around a lot of things that come from a designer's toolkit, which for me actually expanded the role of my team and also how I look to make impact within Starbucks. So over the past couple of years, I've been on more of this traditional innovation, design, business career path, but I was at this point where I was just thinking about what other impact could I be making? I feel like there's bigger challenges beyond the stuff that I'm working on where my skill set would be particularly helpful. A lot of my work actually brings me outside the digital, outside the marketing organization to other parts within Starbucks. And I see that a lot of these other groups actually have a lot of the same needs and challenges around how do we better understand people and problems? How do we better imagine and storytell? And that actually brought me into the space around ESG, actually, social impact, around sustainability, and allowed us and my team and myself actually to take our skill set and bring it to areas that maybe we don't actually directly report into. And I think that's been actually really interesting for me to find ways of how do I utilize the things that I'm really good at in ways that feel like they're making bigger impact. And that's actually been a big part of my role and my team's role. We started to actually touch projects, including our reusable cup strategy at Starbucks. What's an inclusive design framework for our stores? And for me personally, I spend a lot of time coaching and advising people that I see as change makers within Starbucks in these spaces, to find more creative problem solving abilities and skills. So those are really some of the things that I've been doing in the social entrepreneur space. In terms of some of the opportunities, I think for opportunities for these social entrepreneurs, wherever you might be, I find a lot of the value actually starts, Nancy, with what you're talking around this is curiosity and understanding not just the opportunities, but what are the problems that need solving? Where are the biggest challenges? And that can be challenging in a big corporation. I think that one of the biggest challenges is just understanding the system of large enterprise and seeing the different complexities between different parts of that system that create a lot of these different tensions. But I think within those tensions, that's where a lot of the opportunities lie. And I think once you have a really well-framed problem and opportunity space, then you can start talking about solutions. Then you can start bringing other people along with you. And along the way, I think a lot of imagination and a lot of storytelling is really important as you go on that ride.
Thanks, Andrew. And I love how you just kind of gave us a great operational definition of a design mindset, really thinking about what's the structure and where are the intervention points. And something you said really struck me, that how you saw that you had a skill set, as did your colleagues, that you could deploy in different kinds of ways. That's the essence of insider social change agents, people who really know things about, design and accounting and finance and technology, and can take their skills to new domains. I worked with a mid-career executive team that was great with images and designs, and they created a poster campaign for the faces and places of affordable housing to bust some myths, bringing to the space what the housing advocates didn't have, these professional skills that are great. And then suddenly we have, reusable cups and all kinds of new things in our world. So thank you so much for your stories. I really appreciate what you're doing. I'll appreciate that every time I order a Starbucks.
Wonderful.
I'm gonna turn next to Matt. Matt, in addition to being such a longtime friend of the Aspen Institute First Movers program, and in addition to the work you're doing now at Apollo, you've been in HR and talent capacities at a number of other companies too, PwC, MasterCard, BlackRock. So you have a wide view. What keeps you engaged in this challenging work, and how has your own involvement with, say, the First Movers program influenced your practices in your work?
Thanks, Maureen. It's such an honor to be part of this group today. I already want to take Andrew's workshop at Starbucks on design. And it's been an honor to work with Nancy and the team at Aspen for the last 17 years. And I think Nancy and Judy and her colleagues and Eli have created something really special with First Movers. And I've always encouraged Nancy to write a book to capture everything that she's learned from these 300 people who we've had the pleasure of learning from. And the book is finally here. So I'm really excited about the book. I encourage everyone on the call to read it. If I just go back to the origin story, when I was working at PwC in 2007, PwC was pretty good at this. It was one of the companies that was on the cutting edge of leadership development that combined commercial innovation with social innovation. And Kevin's work at IBM took a lot of the ideas we had developed at PwC and brought them to great scale. And so it's a really good example in Nancy's book. But I think one of the lessons that I've had from this experience is that Nancy and Judy and their colleagues have done a really nice job role modeling a sense of curiosity and openness that I think you tend to see with true innovators and pioneers, where even in that first discussion, what did they do? They brought together a diverse group of people who were all really skilled in different components of it. So if a field doesn't exist, Nancy and Judy said, okay, well, let's get leadership development people together with real entrepreneurs who know how to drive a business, with people who are really deep into the different elements of the sustainability space. And let's mix them all together in small groups. Let's put the question out there and let's just see what happens. And I think they were pretty confident that something good would happen. And it's extraordinary that I still remember the tone and sensibility that they curated that discussion with. And in our small group, we kind of mapped out how you would design a first movers program with a sense of co-creation, curiosity, bold ambition, but that we knew we were literally trying to imagine something that didn't exist. And by definition, that would be iterative. And I remember leaving that discussion saying we had all the flip charts, we had it all kind of mapped out. And I had just met Nancy and I said, boy, I hope she knows what to do with this, because this could be amazing if she actually does it. And I might have even said that first day, boy, if you could find the people who are on the cutting edge of commercial innovation and social innovation, they understood how those two things go together. And you could help support them, because change is a lonely business. And then you could learn from them. Boy, years from now, we could really do something with a toolbox. And we're at that moment now. So that part's really exciting. But the other part of it is, for me personally, having worked in 4 firms in different parts of the financial services space, I've actually found that these ideas work in almost any context if you approach them the right way. And I think part of the impetus of this program was, let's talk to the pioneers, but we really want this to go mainstream. And I'm happy to report from my work in these 4 companies, these ideas are portable, they work, and they work in the mainstream of the commercial world. They work if you use them the right way. And I would just offer 3 specific ideas as I reflect on my experience with the 4, and I'm happy to get into examples later. But if I think about the behaviors, I think Nancy mentioned earlier the magic word value. So I've worked in investment firms for 15 years. It's all about value. So how do you create value? So the role that any of us have in leaders and corporations is, our job is to create value. And our job is to create commercial value. The insight Nancy had was, okay, if you were creating commercial value, could you simultaneously create social value without diluting the commercial value? But could you do them both together where the outcome would be higher for both commercial value and social value? Because the world often thinks of these as 2 separate things that don't really interact with each other. And I think the world's getting into trouble with the ESG debates, just misframing the problem. The lesson from first movers, from my perspective, is it's a Venn diagram. It's not separate. Andrew's a design expert. One of my observations in the early days of the design team was, Nancy called it the design team, because it's just, if you frame the problem differently, then you're putting a different energy on it. So her hypothesis was, let's look at value as an integrated thing, not as a separate thing. The other element of that I think is really important, particularly coming from the investment world, if you have a short time horizon, it's really hard to do that. If you have a long time horizon, it's actually really easy to do that, because your scope changes. And the purpose of any company should be to create long-term durable outperformance. And if you're really in that business, then your stakeholders are really important to the way you think about corporate strategy and the way that you think about value. So point number 1 is, it's all about value, but it's a framing and design problem. Number 2 is authentic leadership. A big part of this is each of us as employees in our companies finding our own sense of purpose. In most companies, only 20% of people rate themselves as highly engaged in their jobs. That is a crisis of human potential. I'm an economist originally. That's an economic crisis. If you're a public company, you have a fiduciary duty to do a better job tapping the human potential that already works in your company. It's also a human crisis. And a little bit goes a long way. When you invite an individual purpose discussion in, you start to get access to all this latent potential, and invite people to be authentic. And as we think about inclusion, that's fundamentally important to both inclusion and employee engagement. And then the third piece, I think the lesson from first movers, which Nancy beautifully captures in the book, is the other thing we're doing is we're building a toolbox. And we're building a toolbox with people like Andrew who understand how to think about design. We're building a leadership development toolbox. We're building a change toolbox. Through the Aspen work, we've spent a fair amount of time on appreciative inquiry. Think about that as an interesting change tool. And I think we're co-creating that toolbox together. And the more that leaders engage in this work and we just give them access to these tools that have been proven to work in the most innovative, most successful companies in the world who've participated in this program, good things are going to happen.
Yeah, I love that note. Good things are going to happen. It's what we definitely need to hear in these challenging times. And I think a lot of people think their authentic self, if they're committed to social change, is something they might need to hide at work because it's a little bit renegade. But instead, you've given us this way of thinking about frame it as long-term outperformance. I hadn't thought of that as a frame. What a great frame for any change effort. And when you pivot it to that kind of frame, you're in that middle space that we love in the Venn diagram, where you're using the language of your authentic self. Yes, talk about how you care about the future of the planet, but talk about it in a way where what business products and services can do align with addressing the problem. So thank you for these ideas. And I love keeping on that note that we have some hope with our new toolbox. That said, these are some challenging times and the changes we seek are disruptive. So let's take a view of what you've observed, Nancy, over the years you've worked with, as we've said, hundreds of these change makers. What do you see changing in this longer time horizon view?
Yeah, well, I do want to pick up on your point, Maureen, that we are in challenging times. And so my first observation, I think, over these 15 years where so much has happened is that I think many more companies than when we started in 2009 see the need to create to consider social and environmental trends as they build their strategies for the future. And that's a major step forward. Still, there are lots of companies that really don't know how to unlock the potential of these intrapreneurs. And they're buffeted by the kinds of changes that we're seeing now, which take their eye off the ball, I think, on the long-term performance point that you made, Matt. We can't ignore these social and environmental trends, and there are intrapreneurs in the midst in these companies who can help. I think another thing that's changed dramatically over 15 years, and we see it in the kinds of projects that the fellows take on. All of the fellows are expected to take on what we call a next stage innovation project to deliver this kind of dual value. And what we're seeing is that there's much more focus on the need for change, as if it wasn't hard enough to change in your company. Now we're really seeing the clear need for change at a systems level. The challenges, social environmental challenges that intrapreneurs are trying to address cannot be solved by the actions of a single company alone, although making those changes within those organizations is critically important. But more and more people are taking an ecosystem approach. So for example, just 3 ways I see this happening. There are many more. One is that we see fellows taking on cross-industry projects. So Jeff Burrell at Riot Games, for example, is working to create a playbook for the gaming industry on the kinds of behaviors that are best in that milieu. We see really quite a surprising number of fellows stepping into classrooms in business schools and in design schools to share their expertise and their passions to create a new generation of leaders. And we're also seeing lots of fellows stepping into cross-industry, even leadership roles in multinational organizations. Tony Bellabriga at BBVA is a perfect example of this. BBVA is, of course, a global bank headquartered in Spain. He's been there many years. He worked hard to help them build sustainability into their strategy. And now he's working in the UN, in the European Banking Federation, to work with his peers and with government representatives to find new standards, build new metrics, have new policies. And I think I'll just end by saying we're also seeing now, we really understood the importance of innovation at the beginning, but it's just been amplified over the years. There's a huge need for innovation and for people who have the confidence to be innovators. What I see happening in the finance industry almost makes me want to go back into banking because there's so much creativity in creating new structures, for example, to achieve the energy transition that we need. I'll stop there.
Nancy, that's wonderful. And you opened today by saying you asked years ago, what kind of leaders do we need? And your examples show that we have those kind of leaders. And I have to say, the kind of wisdom that you've created, we use in the MBA classroom. And I think we're both encountering and inspiring a really new generation of MBA students and future leaders, which I so appreciate from the work that you have done. So on the ground at Starbucks, Andrew, you've been there for 11 years. So over your time horizon, what's become hard, what's become harder still, but what's become easier as you notice in the work that you do?
You know, I was reflecting just as Nancy was talking about 15 years. A lot of my work is looking backwards before I start looking forwards to really understand kind of what has happened. And just as I'm reflecting over my time at Starbucks and just over the past decade, I think one of the biggest things I'm seeing is just the rate of change and how much it's really intensified and how much that has caused a lot of uncertainty around the world, a lot of disruption that's happening. I can't remember a time period in my life where I've seen this much change that's happening. And that causes a lot of ambiguity. It causes, I think, a lot of angst. And I think it can cause people to also be very reactive in terms of how they might address things, and also make it difficult to, what I like to say, skate ahead of the puck and start to get ahead of things because things are changing so dynamically. So for me, I feel like there is this importance to become a bit more adaptable just as situations are moving so quickly. But as we navigate through these times, I find it really helpful also to have a strong internal compass, I think, to guide you through a lot of this uncertainty. And one of the biggest challenges I see is when things are moving so fast, you want to move fast sometimes with it. That might be the inclination. But I think one of the best things during those times is actually to slow down a little bit, to really just reflect in terms of where you've been, why you're doing what you're doing, and where you're ultimately trying to go, and try to imagine what those future scenarios might be. And I think that it's also important to reflect, to really understand your value system that's going to serve as your compass. So when you're tasked with multiple different ways to navigate through ambiguity, I think that compass is really important to have, just to make sure. You might not know the right answer. There might not be one right answer, but at least you know that you're headed in the right general direction. So I think that's something that I feel is very important. I also find that just understanding the future and where that might go, and getting people aligned to that shared space is also challenging because there's things that are happening and changing so quickly. So I think that's actually a real need is people that can imagine different types of future scenarios, and also bring people along with them through that discussion of like, hey, where are we trying to go together, or what could the next 5 or 10 years look like? I see that as a challenge, but also as a really big opportunity. And I think lastly, one of the biggest things I'm seeing is, I've been part of corporate innovation functions for a while, or innovation groups for a while, but a lot of what I'm seeing is that a lot of the innovation has to happen outside of the innovation group, if you will. And I would like to see a world, at least within Starbucks, where everyone is innovators within the organization. And because I think we all as humans have the power to do things, to be great innovators. We all have the power to be empathetic. We have the power to imagine and to think of novel ideas and new and helpful ideas. And we all have the power to be creative. So I challenge a lot of the folks that I work with to, even if you're not in an innovation group, there's innovation to be had wherever you might be. And there's plenty of opportunities that are worth solving. And that's a lot of the work that I try to do, is help people unlock those superpowers they have to be innovators in their own world, whether it's work or at home, and to also, where they can, to do that for the greater good. And that's, again, where I have so much passion for social entrepreneurship in general.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Whenever I listen to you, I really see how good you are at these counterintuitive ahas. So we would think, for being a change agent, you want to have clarity, but you're saying be comfortable with ambiguity. You want to go fast. These problems are urgent. You're saying slow down. You want to have a really good design team, and then you're saying form that team and then go outside of it, bust the boundary, be beyond the team. So thank you. I just love how you take things and then turn them upside down for us. Really, really helpful. So I want to move next on this where do you see things going question to Matt. What have you observed changing? Is that overlap space in the Venn diagram getting bigger? Are companies encouraging more people to be these kind of innovators? I know the first movers and others talk sometimes about feeling blocked. So how are we creating a space where the overlap in the Venn diagram will grow and people feel unblocked and encouraged?
That's a really good question, Maureen. And I think we, as you and Nancy have said, we need to meet the context where it is, and we need to meet people where they are. And change is hard because cultures and businesses and humans like change a lot until they actually have to do it. And we just need to acknowledge that that's part of this. But there are a few timeless truths that are helpful. One is Andrew used some great phrases earlier, like, what are the problems that need solving? Well, there's always problems that need to be solved. How do you unlock value? How do you unlock superpowers? It's all there waiting for someone to deal with it, always, in any company. And in some ways, it might be easier to say innovation's waiting to be born. Companies don't even know how to ask for social innovation, but they know how to ask for innovation. They know the long term is smarter than the short term. So there's space there that's waiting to be born, and you can get people's attention through commercial innovation. And then you can add in the Venn diagram. And I actually find this stuff's going mainstream really quickly, and the Venn diagram is definitely getting bigger. And as was discussed earlier, you think about sustainable investing and energy transition. In the investing world, this is probably the biggest opportunity for change of this generation. And at Apollo, I've got some of the smartest investors in the world dedicating their careers to this and saying, we want to help figure this out. This is an unbelievable commercial opportunity, but it's also an unbelievable opportunity to finance, in our case, to finance companies that are trying to be a force for good and to help them succeed. So that's right there. We need people to step up into that space. It's a huge opportunity. The other thing I just want to amplify that Andrew said, which I think Aspen, again, is spectacular at, in order to really design something differently, you do need to pause. You do need to slow down. You do need to get in a space of psychological safety. Nancy did that for me in 2007, and I think First Movers does that every time. The Aspen Institute is really skilled at this. A number of my colleagues at Apollo have spent a lot of time at the Aspen Institute, including our CEO, Mark Rowan, and we all find it incredibly valuable to just pause and say, okay, if you're really thinking big, how would you attack a X problem or Y problem? How would you think about it differently? And how do you create space that's right for innovation? And we're a very innovative company. So we're pretty good at that at Apollo. I will use one example. Mark came up with an idea as we were just thinking about the diversity space a few years ago that has energized our company. He said, what if we thought about it as we just wanted to be really good at expanding opportunity for people from all backgrounds across the ecosystem of Apollo? So we're an alternatives investment firm. We're a retirement services firm. Through our private equity funds, we work with 60 different companies that employ 300,000 people. It's quite a complex ecosystem. But Mark said to everyone who works at Apollo, pick one thing you're passionate about of expanding opportunity for different types of people authentically. Just pick one thing and just help us make it better. And he invited everyone to do that. And I could give you a long list of things that have happened, but I'll give you a couple of good examples. One is as you can imagine, across our private equity portfolio, this includes big companies like Yahoo, like ADT Home Security, like the Venetian Hotel in Las Vegas, all kinds of different businesses, Michael's craft stores, et cetera. And we said, you know, part of change is about interrupting or reframing habits. So in every one of those businesses, we have all kinds of suppliers. What if we prioritized that over a few years, we could spend $1 billion with diverse suppliers that are owned and controlled by people from underrepresented groups? What would happen? And how long would that take? And so we expanded the opportunities in that space, and we achieved $1 billion in half the time that we expected. So we increased it to $2 billion. Those diverse suppliers were always there. They were just ready to compete, ready to roll, the American dream. I'm on the field. I got a great product. I just need people to take a shot on me. And we started taking a shot on people, and really, really good things happened. And then it starts to create a positive loop. The second example I would use is in the private capital space, these are really hard jobs to get. And they tend to be filled by people from 4 or 5 different business schools. And in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, we asked ourselves hard questions and said, why is the industry failing to create pipelines from more diverse backgrounds into our industry? We looked at the HBCU space and said some of the most talented people in the world are coming out of those colleges that tend not to have the curriculum that we need to prepare them to compete as an investor in an alternatives firm, but that's a solvable problem. And let's apply a different consciousness to it. And for me, having been trained in coalition building and government, my first reaction was, let's go talk to our competitors and let's do this together. Because we got to fix the industry together. And so we joined together with 2 other firms, Aries and Oaktree. We built a nonprofit. We called the Wharton School and said, you have the best training. Let's get you the best training. We called John Rice at MLT and said, you can coach the students. And let's create a pipeline out of thin air with our competitors, but no obligation to work at Apollo. We'll compete on who's the most inclusive firm in our industry, but we'll build it together, we'll staff it together, we'll fund it for the long term. And guess what? I've got interns from 55 schools. I can't even tell what school they went to. And the Spelman and Morehouse and Howard students are just as competitive as the Wharton students are. And it's working. But I think part of it was, in our case, our CEO invited people to tap into that authentic leadership and just said, hey, we have an open mind. Let's apply the same Apollo-esque rigor we would apply to an investment problem to the design of solutions to expand opportunity.
So that example totally warms my heart, being from UMass Boston, which is the 3rd most diverse university in the United States. A quick pitch, but we're in the Boston ecosystem, surrounded by Harvard and MIT and Tufts and BU. But we recently made sure that Fidelity Investments comes to interview our students, and they love our students in the same way that you're telling that story. I also love your examples, Mark, because I've often taught HR, and having HR fully as a partner and thinking about how a business flourishes, every example that you gave, rethinking who's in the supply chain, noticing who's already there, giving people a sense of psychological safety, making sure that people bring their passions to work. These are HR things, but I love how core they are to the work you're doing in finance and investing. It's just great for me to hear those examples.
Part of it, Maureen, is like we're expanding opportunity, but the standards remain exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that we're challenging people to be great. You still have to be great. But, I think part of what we're missing in society right now is saying, what if we're great? And it's a very American ideal to say, we're going to open the doors and compete, and we're going to work and help each other to be great. But the goal is we all need to be great, and we need to outperform over a long period of time. And we're more likely to do that with diverse teams and with different voices at the table.
So true. Well, you talk about unlocking superpowers, and you see different superpowers when you teach a more diverse student population. I certainly noticed that teaching at UMass Boston. I also love teaching at MIT Sloan for a number of years. The superpowers are different when you have a wider pool. So I love that whole frame. I think it's itself a great change-oriented frame. So it's time now to move toward questions and some of your tips. And it turns out these align nicely. So as I ask each of you to think about some of your helpful hints for would-be change agents, there's 3 great questions from our audience. Mawish asks, how do we find those networks? So we've encouraged people to find networks of alike others within and also outside their organizations. How might you do that? Pooja says, yes, a long-term mentality is great, but sometimes you have a short-term mentality. Employment contracts are shorter. You're a consultant, you're a gig worker, you're in something for a shorter term. How do you keep a big long-term picture with a short-term time horizon to your employment? And then Beth, an incoming First Movers Fellow, welcome, says, how do we do this as the climate around us has a lot of backlash against DEI? So how do we keep doing this work while managing the backlash? So if you could keep in mind the questions from Mawish, Pooja, and Beth as we move into the helpful hints segment, that would be great. And Nancy, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, thank
Advice
you.
for change agents.
Thanks for the questions. I'll just go to the long-term, short-term thing first, I think, because this is a perennial challenge. And I think, I don't know if this is an answer. We at the Business and Society program have challenged this notion of short-term thinking for the 25 years we've been in business. Short-term thinking can deliver short-term results, but somehow asking a different question to see what would have to be true if we were to look over a broader horizon may open up possibilities for new thinking and move people off of the rigor of this short-term quarterly focus. I think that both of you have mentioned, all of you have mentioned, the need to think like an innovator. And when you think like an innovator, you get to do things in pilot form, achieving small wins that actually build for a longer term possibility. And so I hope that's part of the response to this question of how do you manage in a world that demands immediate results? You try something small. Hao Din, who's one of our fellows, is VP of Technology at Enpro. His objective in life is to enable everyone to be digital. And he's watched lots of digital transformations fail because they focused on the technology more than on the human cost or opportunity. And so what Hao does repeatedly is run pilots. This is short term. He runs pilots and he achieves success or it fails, but in any case, he learns something. And the pilots that I know of are with factory floor workers who are not familiar with some of the many of the digital technologies. They may not feel that they're digital at all. And it gives them an opportunity to practice and learn in a very small, contained, very low risk opportunity to learn. And that creates lessons that provide an opportunity to imagine longer term futures. So I'd say that, and I think just one other tip on this, and I don't know that it relates directly to the questions asked, but there are many skeptics out there. And when you're doing this work, you can also feel that the skeptics are undermining you. You have an idea about how you're going to tackle a challenge, how you might drive change. But I would encourage people to spend more time with the skeptics. Often skeptics will say, that's not possible because XYZ. And we forget to listen to the XYZ because all we hear is no. But the skeptic can help you imagine how you can work collaboratively to co-create an answer that you might not have, a solution that you might not have thought of had you not had the insights from the skeptic. And I remember Suzanne Howard, one of our fellows from IDEO, who was responsible for creating a huge IDEO U, their online university, in an environment where everyone thought training had to be in person. And she said her greatest skeptic became one of her greatest partners because she was really open to listening to what they had to say.
Thank you, Nancy. Great tips. I am always learning from you. Andrew, over to you. Some tips for change makers.
Absolutely. I was looking at my wishes question, and I really relate to it very much so. So I want to share just some of my experience here. I think when you're trying to find the right social networks, when you're trying to find the right questions and to learn, um, I find that it's really helpful to anchor in a strong why. Why are you trying to do these things? Why do you want to be an intrapreneur, a change maker? Or for me, like there was a point in time in my life where I didn't know a lot about design. I didn't know a lot about innovation and sustainability. I still don't know that much in the space. I'm still learning every day. But there's a starting point that we all have. And I think anchoring in a why is helpful. For me, my why around sustainability, I think about my kids. When my kids were born and I was thinking about the world that I wanted them to live in the future, that really anchored my why. And when I was trying to find the right networks or learn, I thought often about that sentiment around my kids and the emotion that came with that helped to power me through and to be more curious and to try to learn more. Same with the design space as well. I don't have a design education. I was a psychology major, a business major. But I became really passionate around the space around human-centered design just from a little bit of exposure to it. But I wanted to learn more. We didn't have the training necessarily within Starbucks. We didn't have necessarily the mentors, the folks within my organization. So I had to look in non-traditional sources. I had to look outside of Starbucks. That got me kind of connected actually to the folks at IDEO, for example, or other area people who are really knowledgeable in the space that I was trying to learn about. I looked a lot outside of my obvious areas. I think there's so much information on the internet. Not all of it is good by any means, but there's so much that you can learn just from a little bit of sleuthing. And I'm amazed with how much free content is out there right now. When I was trying to learn in the design space, there's actually a lot of stuff on things like Coursera or these other massive online courses where there's great content coming from great institutions where you can learn a lot without having to really pay anything. So I'm amazed with the amount of content that is available to get to speed quickly on things. So those are just a couple of quick thoughts that come to mind for me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew. There's really quite a lot of a world out there to discover for sure. And Matt, from you, a few tips, and it looks like we may have momentarily lost Nancy, but she's out there networking in the ecosystem and will be shortly back. Matt, some tips for change makers.
I'd give a couple just to build on what Andrew and Nancy have said. I think that as it pertains to resistance, I think we can often get into trouble in this space when we're debating with each other on philosophies versus recentering ourselves. I'm a big believer in the concept of servant leadership. When we're working inside of companies, we're in service to the collective success of the company, and we're in service to the purpose and strategy of the company. And you're always going to be in the right place if you're saying, okay, let's come back to first principles. What is this company trying to achieve in short term, long term? What is the purpose of this company? We are in service to that. So let's shift from some of these less constructive debates back into, okay, as long as we're in service to that, and as Nancy rightly said, we are experimenting and piloting and testing things that we believe will help the company achieve its goals. Like that's obviously the sweet spot. And sometimes we miss the point that we just need to stay centered on that. As Andrew said earlier, what problem are we trying to solve? We know we're trying to solve the purpose and strategy and success of the collective success of the company. So let's it's a bit of an obvious point, but let's make sure that's our North Star. And then all of this innovation is in service to that. The second point that Andrew made that I thought was really smart, and I once heard Frank Gehry, the famous architect who created breakthrough designs at Disney Hall and the Bilbao Museum with the Guggenheim in Spain. I watched a documentary of Frank Gehry, and he said, and someone said, how did you ever figure out that these metal waves would stand up and they wouldn't fall down? And he said, well, point number one was I made clear not to just hang out with architects. I knew that the answer to breakthroughs would be by hanging out with lots of different types of people. So back to this diverse teams outperform point. And I think in this space, another concept that's helpful is tri-sector leadership. So as someone who has worked in government, worked in business, and spent a lot of time with nonprofits, if you're interested in being an innovator and to take on some of the biggest problems facing the world, and one of the ones I'm currently working on is retirement security in the business that we have at Apollo. But you can't solve those problems without listening to your stakeholders and your colleagues and peers in the other two sectors, whichever one you're working in. And the third point I'd make is a friend of mine, Keith Ferrazzi, wrote a book called Never Eat Alone, which I find really helpful. So we all have access through our universities, through our jobs, through our past jobs, through the networks we already have right under our noses, using meals as opportunities to find people who are experts in areas that we wish we knew more about. Taking them to a meal and interviewing them almost like a talk show has been my practice for the last 30 years. Deliberately seeking out people very different from myself and working far afield. That's how I've gotten inspired to innovate. And I think the Aspen Institute is among the best organizations in the world at doing that. So I've taken those practices and taken Keith's idea of you're always building relationships and learning. And that's been really helpful to me because sometimes these things can feel far away. They're not far away. Start with what you already have and just create a different space, ask different questions. And experts love talking about what they're passionate about. So you know that'll be a good conversation.
Wonderful. Great tips from your breadth of experience, but also muchly inspired by the questions from Mawish, Pooja, and Beth. So ask a question, it stirs things up. Going far afield is a great strength. And one thing I love about Nancy's book and her teaching is she'll often use literature and poetry. On page 148 in her book, she has a gem from T.S. Eliot that I love. Only those who risk going too far can find out how far they can go. I love that passage. And Nancy, I'd like to invite you to say a closing word in the minute we have before we wrap.
Okay, well, thank you all. Sorry for disappearing. Zoom decided it had had enough of me, but I'm back. So, and I think that's one of the things we have to be ready for contingencies and all kinds of challenges. And the message in the final chapter of the book is about staying the course. And we stay the course because we do believe in reflection and an opportunity to, as you both mentioned, slow down and think about your actions in the context of your greater aspirations. But know that this is a long journey. I think at one point, Andrew, you had said something like, I trained for 5K and I find that I'm on a marathon. And I think that's really true for so many. And reflection will give you fuel for that journey. Finding new questions will help you get unstuck in those moments when you feel like you're just not getting anywhere. And you can start asking, well, what would have to be true? What might we do? And there are possibilities to keep moving forward, even when things look like they're very challenging. And if you believe, think like an innovator, believe in those possibilities and that things can change, and it's a long process that will sustain you on the journey.
I leave this session inspired. Thank you so very much to Nancy, to Andrew, to Matt, and to all of you who participated. Go forth and make change.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.